Today, we're going to dig into the story behind one of the most important and, controversial institutions out there, the world's very first permanent international criminal court.
You know, it all really boils down to this one huge question, one that people have been asking for centuries. When just unthinkable atrocities happen, how do you make sure the people responsible actually face justice?
Okay, so let's dive in. The modern answer to that question is the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. It's based in The Hague, over in the Netherlands, and it was set up to prosecute individuals, not countries, but people, for the absolute worst crimes you can imagine. And here's something you gotta know. Even though it has this global mission, the ICC is not part of the United Nations. So what kind of crimes are we talking about here? Well, the ICC's power, its jurisdiction, covers four main things. You've got genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and something called the crime of aggression. These are the big ones, the kind of things the world decided needed a permanent, independent court to handle them.
But here's the thing. To really get the ICC, you have to understand that this whole idea didn't just pop up in the late 90s. Nope. The court we have today is the result of a really long and often pretty frustrating 100-year struggle. So let's go back and see how it all happened.
So for more than a century, this idea of a global court, it was basically stuck in neutral. It was a story of a lot of false starts and a ton of political roadblocks. The journey was long, and it really kicks off right after World War I. You can totally see the pattern here, right? After World War I, it was a failure. Then, after World War II, we get a little glimmer of hope with the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials. But then, boom, the Cold War hits and everything just grinds to a halt for decades. The whole idea was basically on ice until 1989, when Trinidad and Tobago decided to bring it back up at the UN. And then, the Cold War ends, and that changes absolutely everything. It gets rid of that superpower stalemate, and, well, it also unleashes some terrible ethnic conflicts that shocked the world. Suddenly, there was this urgent, undeniable need to finally create a permanent court. It really started with the horrific events in the former Yugoslavia and in Rwanda. The world scrambled to set up temporary tribunals to deal with those, but everyone pretty quickly realized that this one-at-a-time approach just wasn't going to cut it. It was inefficient. They needed a better, permanent solution. And that led to a formal committee being set up in 1995 to actually write the rulebook for the court. So this all leads to a massive moment in the summer of 1998 in Rome. I mean, just picture this. You've got delegates from 160 different countries, all gathered together for this incredibly high-stakes meeting to hammer out the final details of the court's founding treaty, the Rome Statute. And let me tell you, those negotiations were intense. This gives you a little taste of the big arguments. For instance, should the court be able to hand down the death penalty? In the end, nope, that got taken off the table. What about other crimes, like terrorism? They decided to stick to the core four. And the absolute biggest fight was over how to define the crime of aggression. It was so tough, they basically had to say, you know what, we'll figure that out later. It all came down to a final package deal to get it done. Now this right here, Article 120, is super interesting. This was a really critical rule. It meant that countries couldn't just cherry-pick the parts of the treaty they liked and ignore the rest. It was an all-or-nothing deal, and that was designed to make sure the court's power wasn't watered down right from the start. But you can imagine that all-or-nothing idea was a pretty tough pill for some countries to swallow. So to get everyone on board, the negotiators came up with this really clever compromise, Article 124. It was this unique opt-out that let countries hit pause on accepting the court's power over war crimes for 7 years. It was a key move to get the whole thing across the finish line. And guess what? It worked. On July 17, 1998, the Rome Statute was officially approved. I mean, after 100 years of dreaming and decades of being stuck, the world finally had a blueprint for a permanent international criminal court. Just a huge moment. But okay, getting the rulebook approved was really just the beginning. The next big chapter was all about bringing the court to life. That meant getting enough countries to officially ratify the treaty. And of course, dealing with the political fights that were going to pop up right away. And that moment, it finally came on this date. After getting the 60 ratifications it needed, the Rome Statute officially went into effect on July 1st, 2002. The International Criminal Court was officially open for business. So now the court is a real thing. But does that mean its power is absolute? The short answer is No, not at all. And right away, its biggest challenge came from one of the most powerful countries on Earth, the United States. So the US actually signed the treaty, but later said they had no intention of ratifying it. And they started using a part of the treaty itself, Article 98, to protect their own people. This article basically lets countries make these side deals, these bilateral agreements, that prevent them from ever having to hand over US citizens to the ICC.
And check out this number, because it really shows you the scale of the pushback. By August 2003, just a year after the court was even up and running, the United States had already signed over 50 of these so-called impunity agreements with countries all over the globe.
But look, let's zoom out for a second. Even with all these very real political challenges, you just can't overstate how huge of a deal this was. The fact that the ICC even exists represents this massive shift in the world's commitment to justice and the fight against impunity. And that really brings us to the core issue, the big tension at the heart of the ICC's whole mission. It's a final thought for you to chew on. In a world where every nation is sovereign, is it even possible to have a truly global kind of justice, one that really applies to every single person everywhere? The story of the ICC, well, that's the ongoing search for an answer.